Okay, so my research, good. Um, I just want to say that I'll speak for about, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes and we'll take questions. But if anyone has questions in between, Sharon, if you want to point my attention, I won't be able to follow the chat while I speak. I apologize. So if anyone has a question and want to raise hands, I don't mind the interruptions or the interventions. I just can't follow the chat as well. So really my study originally began from the Holocaust, from Holocaust research, but even before that, I'm not a Holocaust scholar, I'm not a historian. What interested me in my study is to understand how societies, sorry, okay, how societies come to terms with the past. And in my own research, I examined three different case studies. I began, today examine many more. I began with the Nuremberg Tribunal and its own, reaction, very unprecedented reaction to the crimes, not so much of the Holocaust, but of World War II. And then I moved to look at the Eichmann trial as another mode of justice making, if you want, or confrontation with the past. The Eichmann trial that took place in Israel in 1961. And then I also expanded the focus to look on South Africa's Truth Commission. And all of this I did coming from a law degree. So my first degree is in law from the Tel Aviv University. And then I also practiced law at the Ministry of Justice. So you can understand why these kind of mechanisms of justice interest me. But my PhD, and this is the work that I've done as part of my PhD, was actually in comparative literature from Stanford in the US. And I'm saying that because my perspective on these different mechanisms of justice was not so much doctrinal as maybe you would expect from a law professor, but was more something that brings together law and literature, law and culture, law and narratives particularly. And what I began to realize when I was looking at these three very different case studies, and I was also looking at other case studies more recently of the international criminal tribunals, etc., is that in all these mechanisms of justice, perhaps with Nuremberg serving as the exception, what we see is a very strong prominence for the figure of the witness, of the person providing the testimony. The witness with their physical presence. You are all lawyers, so you know that what we require from witnesses, from eyewitnesses, is to have some physical presence that allows them this moral agency, this moral position of telling us what is the truth. And in all these case studies, again, except for if you want, the Ur text, the Ur case of Nuremberg, where they actually preferred not to deal with witnesses, and particularly not with survivors, what we see is a focus on the stories of survivors. And we see this moving also forward to the international criminal tribunals and also outside of the courtroom. If we look at archives of testimony, so today in testimonies, in archives of testimony relating to the Holocaust, we have the Fortunov Archive, of course we have Yad Vashem, and we have the the United States Holocaust Museum. But two that I want to focus my attention on is the Fortunov Video Archive, what we call the Yale Archive, with 4,400 testimonies, video testimonies. I'm only referring to video testimonies. We have many more, of course, memoir, written testimonies, witness pages. I'm talking about, interviews with survivors. And while Yale is the one that, if you want, began this phenomenon or this genre of survivor testimony, the biggest one yet is to date is the what we call the Spielberg Archive, or the Visual History Archive in University of South California, that has almost 60,000 video testimonies, mostly of Holocaust survivors, but as you can see also from the slide, they move also to other genocides, other atrocities, and collect testimonies from them as well. And the question that began interesting me on the intersection of law and culture, law and narrative, law and testimony, is really the question of how can we really account for all these stories. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that the Eichmann trial served as really the pivotal point in the history of Holocaust in Israel. Usually when I ask people, who do they recall from the Eichmann trial? These are the two names that come up. Katzetnik, also known as, or Yechiel Dinur, was actually his name, but he was known as Katzetnik. Katzetnik is the nickname for the concentration camp inmates. And Abba Kovner. 99% of the people, if they know something about the Eichmann trial, refer to Katzetnik. And the small minority also remember Abba Kovner, who was talking about the partisans and Jewish fighting and resistance. No one remembers the other 100 witnesses that gave testimony on the trial. And to me, as a granddaughter of 3 Holocaust survivors, whose story was, never told, never shared, never got published, it really bothered me. I really wanted to understand how can we really listen to all the testimonies, all the stories, not just all of the 100 that were in the Eichmann trial. They already made it, if you want, to the public stage, but of all the people that ever gave testimony. And I was fortunate enough when I was doing my PhD at Stanford, because it's such a, high-tech motivated university, to begin my acquaintance with a field called digital humanities, which is basically a field that harnesses computational methodologies for the study of the humanistic objects. And if you want, what we're dealing with here, the testimonies are, at the end, narratives, they're stories. And I hope that you begin to see how my very diverse education and practical experience begins to take form together. And the question that really interested me in the Eichmann trial, and you see here the images of all the witnesses that gave testimony in the trial, is how do we actually listen to all these testimonies? So not just to Abba Kovner, not just to Katzetnik, but really to each and every one of these voices. And for me, this is not just it's not a practical question, or not just a practical question. It's not just a computational, if you want, challenge. For me, it's first and foremost an ethical question. As I said, I'm a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, but it's more than that. We are now on the last years where we have actual contact with living Holocaust survivors. When I grew up, every year in school in Israel, a Holocaust survivor would come and share their story. Friends of mine, I didn't go to these trips, but friends of mine who went to the March of the Living, or these kind of delegations, they always had Holocaust survivors accompanying them. That's not going to be the case for my kids. I have 4 children, and they already hear stories only from the second generation. Even survivors who are with us, they're getting older, it's harder. And that's also part of my ethical commitment, to really understand how, once we don't have the human contact to the experience of the Holocaust, we can still really listen and engage with all these voices. Now, of course, I can always show 1 or 2 testimonies, but what my motivation is really to try to understand how we listen to a plurality of voices, but without losing the connection, the commitment to the singular voice. I don't want to turn these voices, these people, their stories, the survivor stories, into data points or into statistics. I want to find a way to harness computational means from machine learning to artificial intelligence in order to listen to these voices. And I want to share with you 2 examples from studies that I did, one on the Eichmann trial, so again in the more legal perspective, and another one from what we call the Spielberg archive, where I used different methods, different computational methods, in order to try to do exactly what I said here, listen to the plurality of voices. And just to say one word about digital humanities, For me, digital humanities is a discipline, or if you want, a subfield, that whose aim or motivation or mission is to bridge knowledge, bridging knowledge between computational approaches to digital to humanistic objects, between humanists, so professors of the humanities, students of the humanities, and professors and students of computational sciences, but also between the academia, so the more us research people and the people of the industry. This week I participated in a gathering of developers, so people from the high-tech industry, whose hobby, they are all grandchildren of survivors, and their hobby is to investigate history using computational means. And they invited me after hearing about my research, but only a week before their gathering, they got to know me. And within 1 week, we already realized that what they did in their very complicated methods, I did already 5 and 6 years ago with much simpler methods. So that's part of my mission, if you want, in the academia, in the university, to bridge this knowledge between disciplines, but also, across cultures, whether it's the academic culture in the industry, etc. But when I talk about digital humanities, what I mean very practically is to apply artificial intelligence, large language models, what you might know as the ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, I don't know what is your favorite poison in that, and machine learning objects, so statistical methods and algorithms, to humanistic inquiry and to humanistic objects. And what's important here is that we always try to create knowledge that is both human readable and machine actionable. And I will give examples as we talk to what do I actually mean by, making knowledge both human readable and machine actionable. So what you see here are the that's the if you want, the protocols from the Eichmann trial, the transcripts. That's not machine readable. I'm sure you can understand. That's very human readable. Humans can open it and read it. I don't know how many did that, but you can theoretically. A machine can't do anything with that. It's a scan. It's an image for the machine. Today, the problem as we move forward is that my students don't know that there was a world before Google Lens that can read everything and anything. So I always try to tell them, okay, 2 years ago you couldn't do anything with that. But I'm really trying to help them understand what was the development in the last 2 years. Because when I approached these files after my PhD, when I wanted to really, move my research to the digital age, if you want, there was nothing I could do with that. And what I needed to do is to move to what you see here. In order to do this jump between these files and the digital output of my research, on which I will explain in a second, I needed to do a lot of work, really a lot of work, from scanning all the material, OCRing them, so to turn it into a digital format, to clean the materials, to clean the files, not clean in the digital sense. It sounds sometimes that when you do, a computational analysis, it makes everything shorter and easier. Don't be fooled. It's not. Don't be tempted. It's, always a very, very long and treacherous road to getting your files cleaned and ready to go. But once they're cleaned, what I did is to apply an algorithm that we call topic modeling. And what it does is basically take all the materials of the trial and start sorting each document. So I created a document. Each document was one session of the trial. We had 120 such sessions of the trial, including the reading of the verdict in the courtroom. And what I did is that I just split every meeting, every session to its own document. And then the algorithm it's not an AI. It's a very simple statistical algorithm. It's a very complicated one, but simple in the sense of not AI driven. It doesn't know anything about the Eichmann trial. It doesn't know anything about the Holocaust. It just looks at the documents and sees which words come together in a document and in the entire corpus. And then it starts putting them in buckets. These buckets are called the topics, and that's what you see here. Okay, so if you want, my input to the machine is just to how many buckets or such topics or clusters of words to divide my documents. And what you see here is, in a way, a bird's eye view on the Eichmann trial. So I guess that if there are lawyers in the room, then this topic, and that's the way the machine provides it to me, not in the visualization, but in an Excel sheet, if you want. I only did it for, for visualization purposes. I created these word clouds when the biggest word in each topic, in each cluster, is the word that is the most related to this topic. So if I'm asking the lawyers in the room, for example, what is this topic about? Anyone wants to take a guess? If you want to unmute yourself and, give a name to this topic, don't be shy. Your guess is as good as any.
Jurisdiction.
Okay, so it's about jurisdiction. It's clearly about something of the law, right? It's the legal topic. I called it indictment. It can be any other thing. But the word jurisdiction is here, and in that sense, it's completely on point. If I'm asking you now, for example, what is this topic about? Okay, so now you're outside of your comfort zone. It's not about the law anymore, but it's clearly about the ghetto. It's about ghetto and Warsaw and Polish. So maybe it's not just the ghetto, maybe it's about the Polish ghetto, maybe it's about Polish Jewry. And this is the process I did with all these topics in a sense. And what you see here, and I gave the topics names, and I want to draw your attention to two topics in particular because I'm going to discuss them. Again, we are on a conversation about the Holocaust, so I'm sure you understand that the materials are difficult. And I want you to take a look at this topic for a second. We have here words like annihilation, department, Miller, Himmler, Glubotnik. These are all names of high-ranking Nazi officials. We also have here, if you want, the word execution, government. The word you see here is the Eichmann's unit or Eichmann's department. You see the word gas, you see the word Auschwitz, and you see the word final and solution split. Now I want you to look at this topic, the topic right next to it. I chose to call this topic the final solution. Now we have this topic. The only word that is shared between the two words that are shared between these topics is gas and Auschwitz. That's it. These are the two words that are shared between these topics. Now you have a topic that is all about the same experience, if you want, the final solution, if you want, but from a completely different perspective. Do you have any intuition about the perspective? Which perspective is this? With remember, we were, people, block, inside, barrack, food, train, night.
This seems to be somebody who experienced the gas chambers and somehow survived.
So you're completely right, except that it's not the testimony of one person that is represented here. What you see here, in a way, in these topics that you have on the screen, that's the representation of all the testimonies in the trial. These are the 10 topics that comprise the entire transcripts of the Eichmann trial. That's the power and the strength of this visualization. You don't see here 10 topics of 10 testimonies, of 10 topics of one testimony. In fact, what I can do now is go to this topic and see which testimonies spoke about it.
So just to be clear, you're showing us 10 word clouds, but you're saying that word clouds contain the accumulated 120 testimonies.
Yes, their representation as clusters of words. These are not all the words. What I show you here are only the 20 most prominent words for each topic. And together they provide us an overview of, in a way, a topical overview, a topical analysis of the entire trial. So if you want, I'm telling you now that the trial was consisting of this topic number 0, 1, 2, in various combinations. And each document in the trial is some combination of some of the topics here.
Thank you.
And I will explain about it in a second. I just want to say that for this topic, I call death camp. And you're very right, Mr. White, to say very clearly that this is something that came from survivor testimonies. But this is our intuition. I don't have anything to support it yet. And we are lawyers, we want support, and we want to substantiate it. So what I did next is to take the timeline. So these are the two topics, I'm showing them here. And what I did is to capitalize on the fact that the trial has a very classic structure. At the end, the Eichmann trial was a criminal trial. So what we have here is the timeline of the trial from meeting number 0 to meeting number 120. As I told you, in the last 5 meetings, the verdict was read in the courtroom. And in meeting 70, around here, the prosecution ends and the defense begins. I will only share with you, I don't know how much you know of the Eichmann trial, but most of the defense was by the testimony of the accused himself. So Eichmann's testimony himself. And what you see here, as a jurist as you are, is a beginning of a substantiation to what we had as an intuition. What we can see is that the topic that we thought it might belong to the survivors is a topic that comes up very strongly. What you see here is the distribution of the topic on the meetings, on the sessions of the trial. So we can see that the peak of the discussion of the death camp is toward the end of the prosecution case. Now, and again, it requires, of course, some expert knowledge of the Eichmann trial, which I fortunately had because I wrote my dissertation about it. But if you know something about the Eichmann trial, you know that the chief prosecutor, Gideon Hausner, he was a big dramaturg. He created a drama in the courtroom in the sense that he took us from the early persecutions of the German Jews all the way through the ghettoization, the concentration camps, and reaching the peak in the death camps. So it was a very linear progression through, if you want, through the to abyss, to hell, with the last witnesses providing the testimony on the death camps of Auschwitz and other places. And then it really makes sense that here we see the highest peak of this topic. So in fact, it substantiate our understanding that this is a topic that comes from the survivors, which of course are the prosecution witnesses. What we see here is that the bureaucratic topic, what I call the final solution, the topic of the department, Miller, Himmler, all the big bosses of the Nazi, in charge of the Nazi deportation enterprise of the Jews to their death, comes up in the testimony of the defendant. So mainly in the testimony, in the part of the defense, if you want. Now, if I want to show it in a more elegant view, I can show it to you on this time frame. On this bar graph view. And what you see here is that the topic of the death camp, the topic that comes up from the testimonies. Now you see that it was very strong in the survivor testimonies. It was very, very small, minimal almost, the mentions of this, the words, these kind of words in the defendant testimonies. But what mainly surprised me is that it also didn't appear so strongly in the court's judgment. Now, I want to stop here for a second and remind you that one of the main criticisms about the Eichmann trial was that it wasn't really a trial. Several critics, of course, Hannah Arendt was chief among them, thought of the Eichmann trial as mainly a performance, letting the survivors share their stories. Most of the survivors, as you perhaps know, never met Eichmann, couldn't say anything about Eichmann's guilt, direct guilt as we require in criminal law. They were there to share their stories. It had a huge public impact. It had a huge impact on the collective memory of Israelis and of the Jewish world in general, and perhaps also of the international community. But if you look, for example, in international law books, the Eichmann trial does not play a big part there. And you can say that in many respects, it's because of, the attention to survivors' testimonies. But the reason why I went to this computational analysis is because I wanted to see how the court actually referred to these testimonies. Of course, the court allowed them to be heard. But what we see here is that in their judgment, the judges weren't very actually attentive to the testimonies of the victims, of the survivors. And then if you look at the other word cloud, the topic of the final solution, we see, of course, and I'm sure it doesn't surprise anyone, that it's completely very small or minimal in the victim's testimony. The victims didn't know who is Miller or who is Himmler. They even didn't know that they are being killed by what we call today the final solution. They had no idea. They just knew that they are in Auschwitz and they were gassed to death. Or, their fellow inmates were gassed to death. And what we see here is that, of course, the final solution comes very strongly in Eichmann's testimony because, as you remember, his main defense claim was, that he was a cog in a machine. So, of course, hence all the, naming of other people above him, his bosses. What I found particularly interesting is that it also comes double the size in the court's judgment if you compare it to the voices of survivors. For me, it was an empirical way, a data-driven way, to show that at the end, the court was doing its job, if you want. So it's true that they let the survivors speak, but at the end, when they went to determine Eichmann's guilt, and of course Eichmann was found guilty and executed, they do it on Eichmann's terms. And for me, it was a very important, if you want, insight. I want to move very, very quickly to another example that is not from the legal world, but really from the testimonies of survivors in the archives, in the historical archives, if you want. And I did something similar with the topic modeling. Here it's with more topics because I had many more testimonies. It's on 1,000 testimonies. So what you see here is a representation of the 1,000 testimonies in this formation of the topics. Each line is a topic. And we see some topics that very much remind us what we saw in the Eichmann trial: barrack, bank, coffee. That's the topic of the concentration camp. And we have the topic of the death marches and the death camps. But we also have topics that we didn't see in the Eichmann trial so much. So a topic like Jew, community, anti-Semitism, something that is more political in nature, if you want. And what we did then is something that we didn't do in the Eichmann trial, is to take the topics and try to see how they appear along the timeline of a testimony. So we took all the testimonies, 1,000 testimonies, and we tried to parse out what is the narrative structure of a typical testimony, Holocaust testimony. And you see and I only put here the first words of each topic. And you see how a testimony, and that's not one single testimony, that's the average of 1,000 testimonies. And you can do it on 50,000 testimonies if you want. And you can see that we start with the presentation of the witness. So we present themselves. And you see how the beginning of the interview starts with the life before the war, the house, the school, and then something begins. Ghetto, person, police, Judenrat, gas, Auschwitz, dog, car, barrack, bank. You see how we move from the world before the war to the world inside the war. And then we see the end of the war. Say, go, German, come. So suddenly there is some movement. We have more verbs coming. And then letter, cousin, Israel, right? So the search for relatives after the Holocaust. And at the end, the last part of the interview is usually devoted to, showing the pictures of the wedding, son, picture, daughter, etc. But we didn't stop here. What we wanted to do now is to see if men and women testimonies look different from one another. So if we have the typical general testimony, we split now between, we had approximately 50% female and 50% male testimonies, and we split them and started to see what's the same. And you can see that, the first topics are really similar People present themselves, they talk about how their life before the war looked like, where they lived, their house, stuff like that. And then the ending is also similar. We wrap the interview, according to the guidelines, by the way, of the interviewers with, showing pictures, talking about the son, the daughter, the family. But the middle is different. So we see here that female testimonies speak more of the traditional rituals, if you want. Holiday, shul, seder, Friday. Male testimonies, and they also speak much more these um, terms that are about uncertainty of memory, remember, think, must. And we see that they devote much more time in the interview to speak about searching for relatives or communicating with relatives at the end of the interview. The male testimony, instead of talking about, it's not instead of, they also talk about the rituals, but more prominently, they speak of the political aspects of persecution or of community belonging, Jewish, Jew, community anti-Semitism. And they speak more toward the end of the interview, not so much about the communicating with relatives, but about their career and how they moved forward in life after the Holocaust. Then we did something else. We said, okay, we know how a typical family, female and male testimonies look like. But what if we search for the outliers, for the non-typical ones? And I won't go into the algorithms. I'm happy to answer that in Q&A. But what we did is basically tell the machine, give me the most female-like male testimony and the most male-like female testimony. And what I got, sorry, I forgot to say that, excuse me, I ran a little bit too fast. We wanted to see what are the topics that most identify a female testimony as such and a male testimony as such. And you probably won't be surprised to know that female testimonies are more about family life, person, child, thing, family life, feel, and male testimonies are more about unit, army, British military, Soviet officers. So even though the Jews did not fight during World War II, in their testimonies, they speak about the military aspects, the armies that, invaded and stuff like that. And it's important to keep that in mind when we see what is the non-typical female testimony, and that's the testimony of Irene Goldenspiegel. This is a testimony that the algorithm has identified without knowing anything about the Holocaust, nothing whatsoever, or about Irene Spiegel for that matter. But it identified this testimony as being the most male-like. Now, what you see here is a word cloud of the most, the most frequent terms in Irene's testimony. And you can start understanding, even without me telling you anything about Irene, why did the algorithm mistaken her for a male testimony. She has words like American, Spain, hospital, went, camp, names of places, France, Marseille, English. And the reason for that is that Irene's story is completely different than what we usually think of as a Holocaust survivor testimony. Irene was a nurse, American nurse. She studied nursing in the US, and then she went and volunteered in the International Army in the Spanish Revolution. Sorry, in the Spanish Civil War. And when World War II erupts 3 years after, she goes there in 1936, she starts acting as a nurse in military field hospitals. Now, she is a Jew, and she did go through World War II, but her story is completely different than what we usually have in our collective imagination as a Holocaust survivor. And it's only because of the algorithm that I managed to recover this very special interview of someone who has a completely different perspective of the Holocaust. I know that I'm above my 40 minutes, but Sharon, if I may, I want to speak really 3 more minutes about my work since October 7. As you see, I was working on historical testimonies and the way to use computational tools to study them. And then October 7 happened. And within just 2-3 days, I joined an amazing group of volunteers who now call themselves, a few days after, already call themselves EDUT 710, which is in Hebrew, Testimony of October 7. And we are on the website. You're welcome to look for us. And these are a group of documentarists. Of course, they're out of work. We're all shocked by what happened on October 7th. I'm talking about October 8th in the evening. We decide that we want to take video testimonies, just like the video testimonies of Holocaust survivors, but of survivors of October 7th. Our cameramen and interviewers go to the field. These are pictures that they took 3 weeks after the attack. That was the first time where non-military personnel was allowed to go. They went under fire, under rockets, taking shelter of in 15 seconds alerts, accompanied by the army. But now we have this really very powerful footage. That's the map of the Gaza envelope. And we start taking interviews. We do it in a very, partisan way, bottom up. We publish a post on social media. We begin getting WhatsApps from survivors telling us we are in the hotels in Eilat, and our crew members, they're all volunteers. They all go to Eilat, sit in the lobby, and you can see from the date here, that's 4 days after the attack. On October 11, we already collect interviews. That's actually not even our first interview. That's the interview of Omer Metzger, the daughter of Yora Metzger, who was kidnapped and murdered in Gaza. His body was returned. But this testimony, it's 4 days after the attack. Omer doesn't even use the word kidnapped or hostages. She doesn't know what happened to her grandparents. At this point, she just said that they lost contact with them. That was the term, menutake kesher. And it's one of the powerful things about our archive. It's an archive of the present. I'm going to skip this presentation. I'm happy to share it afterwards. Our main commitment is to listen to the survivors, record their testimonies, make their stories accessible, and ensure their long-term preservation. And I want to share with you just one thing, which is I don't want to take too much time. I want to hear your questions. But we are, of course, in debt to the tradition of testimony collecting. Although, in a very big difference to the testimonies of the Holocaust, we collect testimonies while the trauma is still ongoing. We had at the conclusion of the hostages chapter, if you want, on Monday, when Ran Gavil's body was finally recovered and brought to burial in Israel. So we finally don't have any more living or dead hostages in Gaza, but people are still in trauma. People lost all their houses, all their lives, relatives, children, and we listen to them through trauma. These are people that are still dislocated, not in their homes, not in their communities, and that's part of the strength. And I want to share with you the same questions that came up with the Holocaust testimonies come up now. We collected more than 1,700 testimonies. We are a non-partisan, non-governmental body. We live off donations and support of people. We don't get money from the government, and we do it because we believe that that's the only way to keep the historical record, to tell the story of what happened on October 7th. So we collected already more than 1,700 video interviews. Each interview is of about 1 hour, 1 hour and a half long. They're all going through editing process and are put on our website. If we can, we also translate them, of course, to English within the limits of our means. And the question that comes up again is how to listen to all these testimonies. And I want to share with you a vision that I have now. I bring this archive into the Hebrew University. So I'm both at the Hebrew University and a member of EDUT 710. I'm one of the leading members of EDUT 710. And I want to share with you, and with that I will conclude, a 1-minute vision for the archive that we're going to build. We actually started building it with the means of artificial intelligence. So I hope that you see the movie as well. Just a second. Tell me if you can't hear. It's
October 7 is not a single event. It's an endless sequence of stories. Each testimony is a small window into a vast and painful reality, adding an essential dimension to the way that we understand what happened.
כדורים וקליעים עפים לך באוזניים.
This is where the vision of the EDUT 710 archive comes in. We're building a living archive powered by artificial intelligence and designed for our era. The archive integrates transcription, audio, and video, and enables analysis of aspects and gestures such as tone of voice and rhythm, gaze and hand movements. Imagine a teacher or a researcher typing a question such as, how did the October 7 attacks begin?
7 לאוקטובר, 6:30 בבוקר, אנחנו מתעוררים לרעשי שיגור.
התחלנו לשמוע טילים.
Using a system of semantic and sentiment-based search, one can ask complex questions.
זה ממש היה קרב על הידית.
אני עם סכין, אף אחד לא יעבור. אם הם יעברו, אז אני לוקח איתי מישהו.
In the digital archive, testimonies related to the same event, the same location, or even the same person will be presented together, so that we can understand not only what happened that day, but also how entire communities experienced the events. This is an unprecedented moment. It's the first time that a testimony archive is being built in real time. We still have a lot of work ahead of us. Thousands of testimonies yet to be collected. Survivors who are still healing. Communities rebuilding. We need infrastructure and funding to realize our vision. But our commitment is clear. To ensure that all these voices do not remain silent. That they are heard, studied, and given meaning. Now and for generations to come.
Yeah, so that's EDUT 710, and I want to thank you very much for listening, and that's it. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Professor KEYDAR. You want to close the presentation so we can
Yeah, of course.
hear everyone? Fantastic. Does anyone has any question? That's the time. If not, I'll start asking questions. So my question is there any legal use of those testimonies so far from October 7?
So it's a great question. I'll begin by saying that all our testimonies are published on our website and they're available. They're not meant to be used for legal proceedings in the sense that we actually preferred not to investigate our witnesses, both because that's not our mission and also because that might interfere actually in the whether it's the police or the general attorney's attempt to collect testimonies. I would say that we've been in touch with the chief prosecutor, the chief attorney in charge of the investigations of the terrorists of October 7, and I know that they collected also thousands of interviews. He also said that their interviews are not properly investigations. I asked him whether these interviews would ever be published. He said, yes, of course, one day, but I'm not sure that this day will ever come. But we really make an effort to make our testimonies as broad as possible with intention. So they can serve not just legal proceedings, but they can serve as a material for researchers, for creators, for documentaries, for students, for educators around the world.
Thank you. So on that note, Professor KEYDAR.
Professor
sorry.
KEYDAR. Yeah, it's Andrew White here. Sharon, may I ask a question?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I have a comment and then a question. It's Andrew White from London. I'm an intellectual property lawyer, and I'm also a Holocaust educator. My mother was in Auschwitz and Belsen. Professor KEYDAR, I firstly want to say what a highly interesting and original session this was. I've seen many sessions on these related themes, and this is a completely new approach to me, and I'm really very grateful to you. And I have to say how remarkable and inspiring your contribution is, both on Holocaust testimony and also on the EDUT 710 project. But I do want to share with you one concern, and it's not about your work, but it's about the wider field of the digital domain and Holocaust testimony. For me, the most precious part of Holocaust testimony is that it remains untouched, its integrity is absolutely preserved, and it is 100% authentic. And I'm very worried that as we start to fuse together Holocaust testimony with digital technology, we are going to go down a pathway where within a few years, Holocaust testimony is being manipulated and altered from its original version. Is there a risk of that? And what safeguards can be put in place to make sure that these tens of thousands of remarkable recordings of Holocaust survivors remain absolutely untouched for future generations?
Thank you very much for that, Professor Andrew, Professor White, sorry. It's late in the evening in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. Actually, that's the most pressing question. 2 hours ago, I gave an interview to an Israeli program exactly about this question, about the danger of AI, fake, whatever generated, material. It can be images, it can be manuscripts, it can be testimonies, it can be everything and anything. In that sense, we're not talking about future danger. We are way into the presence of this danger. Just 2 weeks ago, the coalition of commemoration bodies in Germany published a letter, an open letter, supported by the German government, to say that the social media website should proactively declare on materials that are fake or AI-generated materials related to the Holocaust as fake, without waiting for users to flag them, but to take their own initiative, which unfortunately we can't really expect them to do, but okay, one can hope, in order to identify this. And I think part of the problem is that that's the challenge. It's really difficult to identify, fake or AI generated. I should also say it's not always generated for a malicious purpose.
No.
Many times it's just, a student wanting to make a point about, survivors, and what students do today. They go to the ChatGPT and ask them, generate a picture or an image of a Holocaust survivor looking at the camera. And that's exactly the images that we saw already filling our social media feeds. And that's a catastrophe. I agree with you that it's a catastrophe. As to the question, what can be done, I'm now collaborating with scholars from both AI and computer science and historians and archivists of the Holocaust. And we're applying for several, research grants. But in order to develop both a theoretical model, but also a practical computational model, hence the collaboration with the AI scholars, that will be able to identify such, inauthentic material.
Right. And I mean, this is a very simplistic follow-up comment, and thank you so much for what you've shared. But in my traditional view of things, there is such a thing as read-only material. And I read only, which cannot be altered. There's an original version, and you can make a copy and do something with a copy, but the originals remain as they are. And I just need some reassurance, frankly, from people like the Shoah Foundation and even the UK institutions that they're going to not allow the digital appetite of the creative researchers and product developers. And I'm not talking about the sinister side, I'm talking about the bona fide side of people who are actually doing things for very good purposes, not allow their ventures to risk opening the floodgates to a far wider sort of digital experimentation with the actual original testimony.
So I think you're making a really good point here. The thing is that the originals remain. They remain they're intact. They are, as you say, read only. But today we are not in this world anymore. Today we have generative AI. It
I know.
reads everything we created, and then it creates something anew. It doesn't change the original. The original will be there. But now you go convince a horde of people on TikTok that what they see, even if it's not malicious, is not a real survivor of Auschwitz.
Yes.
Go convince them to look at the, authentic, perfectly, genuine, interview with a Holocaust survivor. They won't go. It's on their feeds. That's what
I
they
know.
get.
Look, Professor KEYDAR, this is an enormous challenge. You are not a superhuman who can deal with it by yourself. But if anyone has the ability to deal with it, it's you and your colleagues. So I'm kind of reassured. I
We
mean
are
it.
trying our best. But we are, at least what becomes very apparent is that we all understand the danger. And that's already a step forward
Definitely.
from, being ignorant about it. So
Yeah,
at least we
definitely.
share that.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mr. White, and thank you so much, Professor KEYDAR. Sergio, you want to ask something? Okay. I want to thank you both. Thank you, Professor KEYDAR, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And I wish us all a nice weekend. Stay warm. Shabbat Shalom, and may we all have the courage to commemorate and fight for the truth that we just spoke about. So Shabbat
Thank you
Shalom.
very
Thank
much.
you all. And
Shabbat
we'll
Shalom.
see you in the next event of IJL.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night.